Welcome back to Purely IFS, a show that aims to support therapists and practitioners in using internal family systems as their primary approach with clients. I'm Gail Williamson.
And I'm Emma Redfern.
In today's episode, we're exploring what change looks like in IFS therapy.
I think we might need a part 2 for this one, Gail. There's a lot we can talk about here.
Including, what do we actually mean when we talk about change in therapy in general, but then specifically in IFS? And what are the expectations around this? And how much change is actually possible?
And I think a key thing to consider on this topic is who inside a client or ourselves is leading the urge for change.
Sure. So we'll talk about how to approach the client who has a strong fix me agenda, along with being mindful of our parts who may have a similarly strong agenda for change.
And we'll offer examples of meaningful change through using IFS.
So do you think it's fair to say, Emma, that in traditional talk therapy, there is the expectation that if the therapist can just help the client make sense of their experience, then this will lead to change, that the emphasis is heavily on understanding leading to change?
Well, to be honest, Gail, in my foundational training, I don't recall much attention being given to the concept and reality of change at all. For me, that came later as I continued exploring psychotherapy modalities and reflecting on my practice. However, things like understanding patterns, having insights, joining the dots were kind of sought after as valuable. And I think IFS offers all of those and much more.
Yeah, in IFS, I guess we would know that simply gaining understanding of your patterns and the root of your issues typically will not affect meaningful change in a person's daily life. The understanding or making connections between past and present is, of course, helpful. But if we comprehend this in terms of parts, then we'll appreciate that it's our figuring out managers who benefit, because perhaps they feel more in control as a result of all the sense making. But of course, many other parts are not getting help or attention. And this is something we may have to take time explaining to the figuring out parts of our clients. So if I maybe try to give an example of this, say you have a new client, they tell you that they have a drinking problem, which has caused them all kinds of issues in their job, with family and friends. They're terrified that they're going to lose everything, and there's a palpable sense of urgency from them to fix the problem.
So, in other words, the first part you're probably encountering might be a stressed out manager, feeling burdened and frustrated through trying to manage the firefighters who use alcohol, as well as keep wounded exiles out of everyday life.
And that kind of part, the stressed out manager, exerts a lot of pressure for change on the therapist. And it will often really want to understand how IFS therapy works because it's hoping that maybe this will fix the person. So this part will ask a lot of questions, and it will tend to do a lot of research in between sessions on the model and even try to use the protocols itself on parts.
And in terms of change, if this part is busy doing all that, which is understandable, then it's in direct conflict with the sort of change that, as an IFS therapist, I'll be offering, which is to ask the part itself to get to know and trust self and allow self to be in contact with other relevant parts. And as we've probably said before, helping parts buy into the processes of IFS, i.e. trying something new, can take time, as does building inner self-to-part relationships.
And I have to monitor my parts that may get impatient with the dominant manager. And instead, I need to take the approach of collaborating with it. And let's say if a colleague then asked me, for example, after, say, 6 months of work, so is this person getting better?
Well, that would be quite the complicated answer.
Yes, there's almost the expectation that the work should progress in a linear way to a point where the person is cured or fixed, but that's most definitely not how it goes. I would expect that for this client we're looking at, that they've had at least a couple of further crises since we've begun work, but there have also been periods of calm, and it has been possible to meet various parts and even really connect with a vulnerable exile or two. They've also experienced feeling more capable and proactive in their daily lives, but there are regular times where the manager comes up strongly, impatient. It may say things like, I really believe in all this, but I just wonder if there's something else that I could be doing at the same time to speed things up. And it's said almost as though there's a specific destination to get to.
Mm. And this is where it's useful to keep the 5 Ps in mind of having patience with a manager who has the urgent agenda while practicing persistence in terms of what, as an IFS professional, I know works, and holding the wider perspective whereby it's not all on the shoulders of this vocal and active manager.
No. So again, we need to watch for parts of us who may understandably get irritated with such a manager who's coming in again looking for something else despite all this good work we've been doing. But I think we just need to acknowledge and validate it and use this as an opportunity perhaps to do more psychoeducating, explain further during explicit direct access to the manager what it is that you and the client are trying to do when you meet each week, what your intentions are, and what's possible through the work. And then also, it may be an opportunity to work on the manager's relationship with self.
Because ultimately, that's what's going to change things for clients, really helping them to think about themselves differently, i.e., as a person with multiple parts or personalities, and helping them to develop a relationship with their parts and between their parts, not only in sessions, but in the rest of their daily lives.
I hold the belief that no matter how rocky the road in therapy may be, that if I am maintaining a wider perspective of the internal family system and paying attention to all the different parts and self, then this has to be better than, for example, a CBT approach focusing on giving the managers more tools to control the firefighters and exiles, and in the process, facilitating ever greater internal imbalance and polarizations. But I think we only really learn all the valuable aspects of this model depending on which clients come our way and learning to navigate each person's unique system. And one thing I've realized through some long-term work with several clients, I'm talking maybe 5 years plus, is that particularly in those with complex trauma, there often seems to be layers of protectors. But actually, while yes, there will indeed be several managers and firefighters, typically there will be one uber manager.
What IFS would typically call a self-like part, the part that thinks it's the person, do you mean, Gail?
Yeah, I mean, there are no absolutes in IFS as we know, but I have noticed a tendency for this dominant manager, this self-like part, to either be the one you will really have to spend many months negotiating with at the start of therapy for any access to other parts, and then, of course, continue collaborating with it throughout the work, or it will only really emerge strongly as you get deeper into the work. In terms of change, this is when you might hear clients say with frustration, I've been coming here for a year, 2 years, and I just don't know. How long is this supposed to take? So, just to give therapists who may be at this point with clients some hope, that when it seems like there is a lot of frustration or resistance in the client, often this is actually a sign that you're doing really good work and that you're actually approaching some core pain.
Yes, yes, because as we know, our protector's main job is to keep us and anyone else away from more wounded parts. And the more these protectors perceive vulnerability, vulnerability in a part, the stronger the protection they feel is needed and that they provide.
And that's where we can really practice our 5 Ps, that persistence and patience, bringing in a lightness or playfulness when we can, and just keep doing what we know works.
And you talking about your long-term therapy relationships, Gail, reminds me that although IFS teaches that taking exiles through the steps of healing is what removes the necessity for extreme protection, there can be experiences of change along the way. And some clients may seek a level of change that can be negotiated with protectors while moving towards the exile. And this can increase trust in self and enable change in the outer world. And I give an example in my next IFS book, due out early 2026, uh,
Mhm.
where a client's parts in conflict are constraining each other. There's a stalemate, and the client cannot achieve a certain task. And the client is learning to use IFS in their daily life and at times has successfully asked parts not to take over. So I wonder with her if that might be possible in this case, and she negotiates for certain parts to relax temporarily, just for long enough to enable other parts to achieve the specific task in the outside world. No protector let their job go. No approach to exiles, which might have been scary to protectors, was needed.
That's really useful. I guess to remember that we have various options in our negotiations with protectors.
Yes, and our clients' parts will give us clues or indications as to where we can negotiate with them for change or for something to be different. For example, if the client and I are moving towards self to part connection, and I ask, how are you feeling towards the part? A part might reply saying something like, it's not going to work, self doesn't do anything. Or during updating a part about the differences between now and the past, a part might interrupt with, she's still the same, losing friends left and right. And both examples indicate where the part wants or needs something to be different. With the first, it sounds like the part is open to some help and to feel an active presence come alongside it. In the second example, it seems like the part wants more secure or long-term friendships for the client, and we can psychoeducate and hope merchant accordingly.
But of course, it still holds that for a protector to be able to give up his job, then the exiles it protects will need to have been healed. I'm deliberately repeating that because it's often necessary to remind our clients of this IFS maxim. For example, when they are perhaps feeling frustrated that a particular protector is still so strong.
Just to say more about change not being linear. In all therapy, not only IFS, sometimes things, the issue, life, relationships, might change for the worse before they get better. And I think it's important as IFS professionals to address any fears therapist parts who work hard, maybe pleasing people or caretaking and rescuing, might have about such occurrences. That's probably one of the most important things professionals can get out of their own therapy experiences. A sense of what change feels like, its ups and downs, the stalling, the avoidance, those plaintive cries from the client seat of, will it never end? Or I just want to be normal, or whatever the words might be.
That's a great point, because it's important that we not expect or give to clients the impression that therapeutic change will be easy. One of my clients always jokes, I was only supposed to be here for 6 weeks, Gail. That was my plan, 6 weeks, and I'd be cured. And we are still meeting a few years later, she and her parts having done some incredible work, I have to say. And we'll actually come back to this in part 2 on this topic.
I'm thinking that's pretty common, Gail. And I want to say that I appreciate the inbuilt but indirect approach to change that IFS also brings. For example, the role of the hope merchant and the focus on releasing constraints all imply change.
In a much more subtle and elegant way, where we introduce to a part the hope that something could be different, which is different to holding a change agenda. I think you have an example of this, Emma.
Yes. For instance, when a client is doing insight with an exhaustive protector, we might ask the protector question, can you ask the part what it would prefer to do if it didn't have to work so hard or protect the exile any longer? Or when we've inquired if the protective strategies are working and the part graciously concedes, well, no, we might ask, if I could show you another way, would you be interested? But with some clients, of course, we might choose to have explicit conversations with their parts about how they perceive change and where they perceive it happens.
Those parts who might be used to traditional talking therapy, who think coming for the weekly session offloading will somehow fix something, or those parts who think that offloading means we will then respond with some sort of solution. Ah, well, you need to do this and this, followed by that, and come back and see me next week.
Exactly. And it's understandable that some of our parts who've been raised without any autonomy or agency of their own see change as within the power of some external authority figure. I'm wondering, what do you find your clients tend to self-report in terms of change, Gail?
Well, a common one is clients reporting that they're not triggered as often as previously.
I was saying this about myself only the other day, Gail.
Hmm.
Struggles with software or anything technical used to have some of my parts unraveling emotionally.
Understandably,
But recently, I was aware of calmly persisting and trusting that I probably would get this particular task done on the computer, and I did. And my sense of agency has increased as a result both of therapy, IFS therapy, and of taking action in the outside world. Similarly, with clients, one of the most notable shifts is that doing or saying something becomes possible when previously they might have been prevented internally from doing or saying the thing. Also, I find a newfound natural ability for self-care can emerge, as if a client system quietly allows this when perhaps previously they've been dominated by, for example, a pleaser protector who ensured the person focused on everyone else.
sure. Clients tend to, I find, exhibit more of the C qualities of self. Whereas you say they will have more confidence and courage to make certain changes in their lives. And creativity is a big one.
Mm,
Suddenly they're writing or painting, doing creative things that they'd maybe long wanted to engage in, but had previously felt blocked in doing so. And then I also hear self-reports of, I feel more like the adult I am instead of feeling like a child as I always have.
that's wonderful, Gail. Also, and not every therapist does this, but as part of the opening preamble to a session, I'll often inquire how things have been since last session. I might even ask if they've noticed a shift specifically related to something we were focusing on. I don't rely on self-reporting necessarily, but often that low-key inquiry can bring a dawning awareness of, well, actually, now that I think about it, I have been feeling calmer than usual, for example.
Yes, I think if a client isn't spontaneously reporting to you, then it is good to ask and encourage that reflection on what may have changed for them.
And regarding the 8 Cs, for me personally, there was an increase in connectedness as a result of two separate legacy unburdenings. The shift in how other people related to me was really noticeable. Anne Cinco, though, who teaches on this subject, recommends that we don't raise our clients' hopes about others changing when we unburden our legacy burdens. But that doesn't mean we don't keep an eye or ear out for this.
Interesting. And, reminds me we actually need to do an episode, I think, on legacy burdens. It's such an interesting aspect of IFS. And then the other C quality that really emerges, I think, the more work that clients do, is clarity, which is great, but also it has to be said a bit challenging.
Challenging?
Well, it's something that I've also found that when you become aware of your own parts, you become more aware of other people's parts and the way the world works. You see what's going on in a way that perhaps you hadn't previously, which is challenging if others around you don't also know about the parts and speak the same language.
Mm.
One client who I first worked with pre-IFS and who I'm glad came back to me once I trained in IFS, the change in him is remarkable in many ways. In our previous therapy, something big may have happened in the news, and he would say, I couldn't care less. All I can focus on is the war inside of me. Now, after 2 years of working with his parts, he regularly uses some of his session to talk through how affected he is by the current world conflicts, including the ongoing genocide in Gaza, etc. And he has impressive clarity about what drives them, along with lots of compassion.
I see what you mean, girl. Sometimes having therapy can wake us up in ways that makes being part of current society and all its polarized parts challenging.
Thanks again for joining us. The second part of our focus on the topic of change will be available soon.
We'll look at the external pressure to change that clients as well as therapists face, along with the concept of constraint release, as well as how we might respond when a dominant protector won't step back at all to allow the presence of self and the change that can bring. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.